My name is Peter Winstanley. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel who retired from the Army Reserve in 1994. Following my retirement, I developed a deep interest in the story of the prisoners of war, the Japanese. Today I have the privilege of interviewing Arthur Gamble, who was a member of the 2nd 4th Machine Gun Regiment, and during the period of his incarceration in Singapore, he went to slave on the Burma-Thailand Railway with a group called H-Force. We will now cross to Arthur to hear his story of his time as a prisoner of war. So thank you, Arthur. Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview today. I realise that it's interfering with your Sunday morning, but much appreciated. Maybe if you could start by telling us where you were born, where you were a little bit about your education, up to the point when you enlisted in the army.
Yeah, okay. I was actually born in Perth, although my parents were on the farm at Wildcatcham. Education, we went to a little state school at a siding called Nalcone, which for a period of 1 year, through lack of numbers, they closed the school down. So I missed more or less 1 year of schooling. I was raised during the Depression. Money was very, very scarce, and my father managed to send me to Wesley College for 1 year. After that 1 year there, I had to go back onto the farm and do a man's work, which I carried on, and 5 years, 6 years, before I ended up joining the army.
And what date was your enlistment?
Well, I thought I had enlisted back in the end of 1939. I wasn't called up until October 1940.
Had you joined maybe the militia? Did you join the militia before the war?
No. Being in the country, there was no such thing as militia down there.
Yes. And once you were enlisted, I presume you did some training in Northern?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we were in Northern for 6 or 7 months.
Yes.
From there we were transferred to Woodside in South Australia. We were there for another 3 or 4 months and we were shipped up to Darwin. In Darwin we were on beach patrol at the mouth of the Howard River. When we went to Darwin to start with, we went to Winnelli Camp, and from there, while we were there, the place was rife with kangaroos, so we had kangaroo stew, and kangaroo stew, I'd never had it before, and a lot of other fellows never had it too. And we had to walk about 300 yards to the nearest toilet, and a lot of people a lot of blokes were in the same situation. They just couldn't make it. It was one hell of a mess, stacked to high heaven. So we didn't really enjoy the kangaroo stew. Yes, we went from Adelaide up to Corn, where we stayed overnight, and from there we caught the train. But before we got on the train, 3 of us got a flagon of beer each, which we treasured all the way up there. Getting close to Alice Springs, the weather was extremely hot, and these flagons only had a cork seal in them, and the corks blew out. We decided we wouldn't waste it, so we drank it. So my arrival in Alice Springs was rather a sad one for me. I was that drunk I could hardly walk.
And how did you move from Alice Springs to Darwin?
We went by road transport. We drove our own vehicles. How the hell? They must have been on the train with us when we went up to Alice Springs. We drove up as far as Laramar, and then we caught the train again. Interesting thing about the GAN, as we called it in those days, little old train, it didn't have enough power to get up the hills, so a lot of the fellows had to get out and push and put sand on the rail to get a grip.
Yes.
Somebody decided they'd play a bit of a joke, and they uncoupled it in the middle, and the back half careered back down the hill, front half shot off up over the hill. We had to go back to pick up the second half of the train.
Soldiers are never any different, are they?
While we're on that train, there was a 10-ton truckload of bottled beer, and somehow or other the fellows smelt it, and at night time there was a progression of fellows going from truck to truck back to the load of beer. They lifted up the sheet and loaded themselves up with beer, and that was to go to Elliot. When we pulled into Elliot, there was an Air Force truck pulled in to pick up their beer, and lo and behold, there was nothing left. They'd shifted a lot of it, and some of the fellows were pretty high for about a week after we got to Darwin.
Yes.
They carried all this beer with them.
Now, do you remember well, maybe I'll summarise, when you left Darwin to go away to war, and you probably had no idea that you were going to Singapore, you moved by small ships to Port Moresby, and then onto the Aquitania in Port Moresby, down to Sydney, round to Fremantle, and maybe you can tell us your experiences of when you arrived back in Gage Roads.
Yes, we. I'm trying to think of the name of the boat we left Darwin on. I can't think of it. Apparently it was the Kaiser's Prezi yacht before World War One.
Well,
anyway,
one was the Morella.
Morella was the name of it.
Yes.
Yes, that's it.
Mm.
Yeah, we transhipped at Port Moresby. From there we went to right around back to Fremantle. And we hadn't been back to West Australia for how long? About 8 months. And one particular fellow, his wife had had a child the night before we arrived in Gage Roads. The first lighter that came out to the Aquitania, when it pulled out, you could see this fellow sitting up on the front of the ship. He was off, but then it all started. Everybody else decided they would go ashore also. Some of them had difficulty getting down. As one particular fellow, big fellow, he slid down a rope and he sort of lost control of his speed, and he was red raw between his legs. He must have had a very uncomfortable time. A lot of fellows thought the Aquitania would be there for several days, and they shot through to their homes, some in the country, and as a result of it, there was about 90, I think, left behind. We tried, the group I was with, we tried to get back on board the Aquitania about 12 o'clock at night, and we were told we had no chance before 6 o'clock in the morning. So we got back there and got back on the ship. So we sailed without these fellows that went back to their homes elsewhere.
Yes. Did you know a fellow Jim Allpark at all?
Yes,
I
knew of him, yes.
Yeah, he got left behind.
Yes,
Mm.
yes. Those fellows ended up in, I think they were all rounded up and put in Fremantle jail for a few days
Yeah,
and shipped up to Java.
yes. They still became POWs.
Yes,
Oh.
yes. They caught us up later in Singapore.
Yes.
POWs.
So do you remember when the Aquitania was in the Sunda Straits and you disembarked and got on small vessels to go into Singapore?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, we transshipped onto these two little Dutch boats. It took quite a while. During the trip on the Aquitania getting to the Sunda Straits, we had two destroyers with us, and one suddenly turned around and went back and dropped some depth charges. Whether there was a submarine there or not, we'll never know. But the little Dutch boats were not very comfortable. The toilet was a bit of scaffolding rigged out over the stern of the ship, and you had to climb out and perform straight out into the water. I can't remember the name of those two ships. We called one the Van der Hum. I don't know whether that was its actual name or whether that was the smell of it, but anyway.
Yes. So what was your first impressions when you arrived in Singapore on the 24th of January 1942?
I quite honestly, I didn't know what to expect. There was one I thought he was a Malay selling something on the wharf on the jetty there. It turned out that he was a Japanese lieutenant, and we saw quite a lot of him later on. He said he watched us come ashore, he knew all about us. He had been apparently in Australia himself, I think as a wool buyer. His name I can't think of at the moment.
And now of course you were there only 3 weeks before the capitulation took place, but which company were you with?
C Company.
C Company. Who was the officer commanding C Company?
Mick Wedge.
Oh, Mick
Lieutenant
Wedge, yeah. And what sort of an officer was Mick?
Very good. Very popular fellow.
Yes. Yeah. And what did C Company do in the defence of Singapore?
We were posted out in our gun positions out on the south-west corner of the island. And we were attached to an Indian brigade. A lot of those Indian boys had only been in the army for about a couple of weeks. They were very, very raw. We followed what was happening up on the mainland as closely as we could, and suddenly one morning the Indian brigade must have got word sooner than us, because they were all gone. And we got word that the Japs were landing or attempting to land. So we, C companies, saw nothing of the actual landing. I think Don Company withstood most of the Japanese fire when they did the actual landing.
Yeah, well they were more on the north of the island, weren't they?
Northwest corner.
Yes. Yeah.
West of the causeway.
Yes. Do you remember the day when the fighting stopped? The 15th of February 1942?
Yes.
What was it like? What was the impact of when, as I understand, the firing just stopped? There was quiet where...
Well, we were out, I don't know the actual name of the place, somewhere out from Buckatina. So we couldn't see just what was going on in the city. But there was a battle going on, shots everywhere. And all of a sudden we were told to assemble back behind our positions and were told we were prisoners of war. We had no idea. It was a hell of a shock. Some of the fellows even fainted with the shock.
Did you lose any of your men? Did any die around that time?
Yes. Yes, there was quite a lot of casualties.
When were you aware that Colonel Anketel had been killed?
I don't think I heard until a couple of days afterwards. He was severely wounded,
Yeah.
and he died of wounds later.
Yes. Yeah. Now, do you recall the march out to the Selarang barracks in the Changi area?
I certainly do. Yes, it was a hell of a long way. We hadn't eaten very much in the last few days, and we were not very fit at the time. We were tired. It seemed that we'd never ever get to where we were going. We spoke to quite a few of the locals as we marched along, and I said 2 more kilos, 2 more kilos, 2 more kilos never seemed to end.
No. And did any of the locals assist? Did they give food to any of the boys going by? Do you recall anything like that occurring?
No,
No.
no.
When you got to Selarang barracks, how did you exist there for, the initial period?
We were under our own administration, and a C company under Captain Cameron, we were allocated a house, quite a nice house actually, but we had to sleep on the floor. There's absolutely no facilities left in it. We had to, Captain Cameron called parade every morning, which most of us attended. One particular friend of mine, Jock Leith, Jock was late coming on parade. Captain Cameron, as he approached, Captain Cameron said to him, "Where have you been, Leith?" And Jock replied, "Putting my boots on, Cameron." Captain Cameron said, "Sir, when you address me." Jock replied, "And bloody private when you address me." Everybody burst out laughing, including Captain Cameron.
Yeah. Now, later he became Major Cameron.
Yes.
Do you know when that occurred?
At the end of the war,
Did it?
I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And how would you describe him as an officer?
Very good. He was a man's man.
Yes. Because he was an older man, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a First World
Yeah.
War man.
And I suppose this is getting away from the subject, but later a farmer down towards Esperance.
Yes, yes. Yes, I understood he led a shearer's strike some years before the war. A very forceful man.
Yes. Now, between February 1942 and May 1943, when you ultimately went to Thailand, what work were you made to do by the Japanese?
We spent about 4 or 5 weeks in Changi, Selarang rather, and we were sent out on working parties to various places in Singapore. I went to Siam Road, and from there we were building a monumental drive through the Royal Singapore Golf Course and building a monument up on the hill which is across a reservoir. There was a footbridge across the reservoir.
Yeah, McRitchie Reservoir?
I don't recall the name of the reservoir. But anyway, the monument they were building up on the hill was made of wood, and we all collected all the white ants we could and took up hoping that the White Ants would demolish the erection there.
Yes.
It was there that I became aware of some of the fiery Scots people. There was one fellow in our company, the Jap belted him over the head with a big stick, and his oil name was also Jock. He did his quince, and he had a shovel in his hand, and he slammed it straight into the Jap's stomach. It's a wonder he didn't cut him in half.
Mm.
So by the time the Jap picked himself up, we'd told Jock to get going quick. He got away somewhere and got out of sight. But he was extremely lucky because he would have, I think they would have shot him, done something. We would have killed him if they had caught him.
And what was it? You've given me his Christian name, or what you call it?
Jock Ferry.
Thank you, Jock Ferry. That's excellent. Were there anything else, any other employment that the Japs put you to?
Yes. I'm not sure whether it was from Siam Road Camp or not, but I worked all over the place. I worked in the railway yards, lumping railway iron, timber, latex in rubber bags. And a lot of this stuff was cut out and stacked in the holes in the boats in the harbour. I worked in quarries, a quarry at Buckatima. I worked there for quite a long time. It was all sort of hammer and tap. Big boulders that had been too big to get into the crushing plant had to be broken up. It was from there that we had contact with the Chinese working ladies, all dressed in black right down to the knees. We called them concrete Annies. And they used to say to us Australian fellows, they'd say, plan Joe, plan Joe. I'm pretty certain plan meant go slow, which we took a lesson from them and went slow.
Yes.
But it's amazing how slow those Chinese could work.
Yes.
You had to see it to believe it.
And what were they actually doing?
They were probably doing the same as we were doing. They weren't doing hammer and tap, but they were clearing away all the stone and all the rest of it after the blasting.
But this is in Singapore, is it?
In Singapore.
Yes, yeah. And when did you first hear that you were going to be moved out of Singapore as a member of H-Force?
Well, I worked all over the place in Singapore, and we did that for 12 months, I suppose. Then we heard that, the other forces had pulled out, F-Force had gone, and it wasn't long before we told that there was another force going. And it turned out to be H-Force. When did we go up? Early 43?
About May 43.
Yeah.
And did you have any idea where you were going? What message were you being told? Why were you being shifted? And did you have any idea where you were going?
We were told it was a much better place than we were at, and it was we'd live a life of luxury, which we didn't believe. No, we had no idea. Yeah, we thought we knew we were going to Thailand. That was a horrendous trip in the train. The biggest problem was sanitary requirements. There was 30 odd of us in a steel van, which was very, very hot. Fortunately, the doors were left open.
This is a railway track, is it?
Railway track,
yes.
Our biggest problem was, well, one of our big problems was lack of water. We got to Kalalumpa, and we jumped out of the train and ran up to the engine. The engine was letting off steam, and we could gather a little bit of water from the engine. So that gave us at least a drink. I don't know how many nights we spent on the train going up to Ban Pong. But anyway, when we got there, we were more or less immediately set off on the march.
Yes.
We didn't know where we were going.
Do you remember do you remember whether you marched on a track or on a bitumen road or sealed road initially?
No sealed roads that I remember, but maybe a road to start with, and then it was a track from there on.
Yes. Do you remember, say, being in Kanchanaburi or Canberra? That would have been on about the second night.
No.
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 Okay. I'm really searching for some information here, and if you don't remember, it doesn't matter. But after Kanchanaburi, it's generally accepted that from Ban Pong to Kanchanaburi is 2 days march, or 2 nights march, however it is. And then there was another 2 days of march before many of the men crossed a river, which isn't the Kwai, the River Kwai, it's called the Mae Klong. But possibly on the first night you stopped at a temple. Do you remember anything about stopping at a temple? No. Do you visualise crossing either a rickety bamboo bridge or going across a river on ferries?
No. But I remember having a swim in the river when we had a dip in the river, which was
on the way up.
On the way up.
Yes. And I guess you relished that.
Certainly did.
Now you then would have marched on to the area that you ended up working in, somewhere like the Connew area, or?
Yeah, well, apparently it was Connew we stopped at, but we were more or less, we had to, the camp was already constructed, such as it was.
Yes.
So we were more or less put straight to work.
Now what work were you doing?
Well, to start with, we had to walk down an extremely steep cliff, and you just had to climb your way down in footholds. We went straight on to hammer and tap.
Yes.
And when the sufficient holes were drilled, they blew them out. We were only about 50 yards away from the explosion, and rocks had blown around all around us. Once the smoke had cleared, it was a matter of rolling all the boulders, stones, all the rest of it, over the edge of the hillside, which was very, very steep. Some of the big stones, as they rolled, you could hear them rolling for a quarter of an hour afterwards.
Yes.
Racing their way down.
Yes. Now, when you were doing hammer and tap, every day, where did you get your working tools from? Like the hammer, and as I understand it, the taps were drills that you would have had sets of 3. Did you have sets of 3, or at different lengths? Do you remember it all?
No. In my experience, no, we didn't have sets of 3. But we just got it away with the one we had, which was only about 2 feet.
Yes. Did you go to somewhere like a Japanese store to pick up your tools every morning? Or?
No, we more or less handed over from the previous shift.
Ah, right. So yes, I understand. Now, did you do the hammering or did you hold the
We
tap?
alternated.
Yes.
We alternated.
Yeah.
And some of the city boys had never done this sort of work before, and you had to be very careful. Because I took a smack fair in the ribs with a 4 pound hammer.
Yes.
I saw it coming, fortunately.
Yes.
I neglected to say that on the way up, on the march up, a lot of the Thai people wanted to buy all our possessions, everything they had. And they said straight out, look, you might as well sell them to us because we'll get them anyway. And we walked mainly at night. One particular officer, he had 3 or 4 big bags of stuff, and when he went to sleep early in the morning, we slept at the daytime, he tied all these bags to himself, and when he woke up, they were all gone. He lost everything.
Now these I just want to go back to this hammer and tap. Did the top of the drill ever splinter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Quite frequently.
And you know how when you keep striking metal it loses its tempo. Was there any way for the drill to be rehardened?
Well, there is a way for sure, but there'd have to be a blacksmith shop somewhere around. I never ever saw the blacksmith shop.
No. Well, I do have a report that there was a forge, but it was a long way away from where you were. It was probably 4 or 5 kilometres, so it seems unlikely that you were going up there, but there might have been one somewhere else that you weren't aware of.
No, I never saw it.
Yeah. Now, you said that you used the hammer and tap, and then they would blast, and then all the rubble had to be removed.
Yeah.
That must have been an difficult task to do.
That was not our introduction to the basket, but you formed a chain and handed from one to the other and tipped it over the side.
Yes. Now, in your own case, what clothing and footwear did you have at this stage?
At that stage, I think I still had my boots and perhaps a shirt. I know I ran out of shorts. I managed to get hold of an old bit of blind, and I made myself a pair of shorts which I wore for a long time. It wasn't until we got back to, no, that's wrong. We ended up with a lap. I managed to, somehow or other, I got hold of a Japanese lap. I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Fondusi?
Yeah, that's right. So I wore that for months and months.
Yes. Yes. Now you're in this area at around, we'll say it's around Connew, certainly roughly in that area, which could be 10 kilometres one way or the other. But do you remember any of the 2nd, 4th officers that were with you as part of H-Force in that area?
I knew they were there, but I never ever saw them.
No.
I'm pretty sure Bernie O'Sullivan was there. I didn't actually see him, but I believe he gave a few of the blokes a spell on the working parties.
Yes. Do you remember the names of any of the doctors who were in that area?
Doctors?
Yes, Australian doctors.
No.
No.
I never saw, as I told you before, we didn't have a doctor. I never saw a doctor. We had that Indian medical student, a fellow by the name of Pereira,
Yes.
from memory.
Yes.
He was the only medico, apart from a an RAP boy, local, an Australian boy,
Yeah. Do you remember who he was?
Jack Bastable.
And was he one of your own boys?
No, he was from another unit.
Yes. And how do you spell his surname?
To the best of my knowledge, Bastable.
Thank you. No, I'll have a look at that.
Mm.
And let's go back to your Indian doctor, Pereira. Would you have known what his rank was?
He had no rank, to
No.
my knowledge.
No, he wasn't wearing rank.
No,
No.
no.
This is just a comment, but most of the Indian doctors were warrant officers, and there were a number of them that worked on the line, and they worked very, very well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, as I understand, he was just a student.
Yes. Yeah. Now, did you ever have any contact with any chaplains?
The only contact I had was with, well, not contact, but I was a funeral bonfire, and Harry Thorpe conducted the service.
Yes.
That's the only contact I had with any padre.
Now, did he actually just come to the camp to do that,
Yes,
or
yes.
yes?
I understand he moved from camp to camp.
Yes. So that was, yes, I'm familiar with the name Harry Thorpe, and I've heard very generous or kind comments about the work that he did.
Yes.
Good comments, the work he did. How was your own health while you were in this area?
Until I was very foolish. I was dying for a drink, and I cut a drink out of a running creek. And unbeknown to me, we were quite a distance away from the main track. And apparently a big party of not Indians,
Coolies?
Javanese, I think they were, had moved up the day before, and they were not very. Things were a bit of a mess and crap everywhere.
I think Claude Anderson would say they weren't toilet trained.
That is dead right. Anyway, I was foolish enough to have a drink out of this creek, and a matter of only a few hours, and I was down with cholera.
Yes. Now, who treated you when you had cholera?
The only medicos I saw were was Pereira
Yes.
and Jack Bastable.
Yes. And did you have a saline drip or anything like that? No. What did they do to treat you? Did you drink a lot of water, or was it just rest?
You just had to grin and bear it.
Were you in an isolation hut with others suffering?
With others, yes.
Did they have cholera?
Yes.
And did any of them
Yeah,
die?
we were in what they call the cholera lines.
Yes.
Yeah. Cholera is a very painful thing to have. It seems that all your stomach lining disintegrates, and it's just like milk coming out of your body, and you have these violent, terrific cramps in your stomach.
Yes.
And we tried to be as clean as we could, and you'd scream out for a boat, which we called a boat, was a piece of bamboo split down. It called for a boat.
As a bedpan.
As a bedpan, and you'd get out of the tent and try to relieve yourself. And most of the time you'd flake out, you'd be unconscious, you'd end up lying flat on the ground in amongst all the shit.
Yes, you can't put it any other way.
Yeah.
Did you ever have malaria?
I had malaria many times.
Mm.
I had both MT and BT.
Yes.
Which, a fellow right alongside me in the Cholera War tent, he had cerebral malaria, and he let out one violent scream, and he was dead.
I think you mentioned that you were involved in cremating some people.
Yes.
Was that
Yes.
before you got cholera?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I apparently had malaria and I was too sick to go to work. But they had to produce so many
Workers.
workers or bodies as the officer, I think I gave you his name previously, he had to produce so many bodies to go to work. He was unfortunately called them bodies because the fellows ended up calling him, nicknaming him Bodies. It was Dick Puckley. Puckley.
Oh yes.
He was very unfortunate. He got the nickname of Bodies Puckley. I felt very, very sorry for him. He had to produce so many workers, and the poor man, he would end up crying in front of all of us. And I felt very, very sorry for him.
That's understandable. Now, you were at some stage evacuated down south, and you don't have any recall of how you went down to... I assume you went down to a hospital camp further south.
Yes.
Do you recall how you got there at all?
I thought I went by train, but apparently from information received by local records, I suppose,
Yes.
I was evacuated to Canoe River camp and went down by barge.
Yes, yeah. Either way, do you remember actually being in that hospital camp?
Yes.
To mine, that could have been one of two. It might have been Tarsay, or it might have been further down at Changkai. That's my feeling.
I thought it was Tarso, but once again I'm not sure.
Yes. Do you remember being treated by any doctors when you were there? Even if you may not know them by name?
No, I don't.
No.
No.
How did you end up getting back with your H-Force fellows if you'd been moved down there?
I didn't get back with them until we came back to Singapore.
Yes. Yeah.
While I was in this hospital camp, I befriended an Eastern States fellow, Oscar Clooney. He was a fairly big, strong fellow, and he was very good to me. They had a canteen there, and the first time I saw any money, we got a few bahts each, and we were allowed to go down and buy ourselves an egg or something like that at the canteen. And Oscar and I ended up sort of going down and buying for other fellows.
Would you be able to help me with the spelling of Clooney?
No. I don't know whether it ended with a IE or a Y.
Yes, that's fine. Just before we leave that area, did you remember having contact or knowing that Major Saggers was in the area?
Yes, I knew Major Saggers was in the first camp we went to, Canoe 3.
Yes.
But I knew he'd been transferred to some other unit, and I didn't ever see him.
Yes. Yes, he'd been transferred to the 2nd 20th Battalion, I think. Did you have any contact with any British prisoners of war as part of H-Force?
Yes. Back in hospital camp, I was alongside an English fellow, and for a while we shared what little we could buy.
Mhm.
His name was Bob Diprose.
Mhm. Thank you. And was he English, Scottish?
No, English.
No? English. Yeah.
English to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
We had some sort of flour we bought. We shared between us,
Mhm.
and somehow or other he was shipped out, and I caught up with him back in Singapore.
Yes.
And I asked him, I said, where's my share of what we bought?
Mm. Mm.
He wasn't very happy, and he couldn't give it to me.
Mm.
But the next day, they told me he was dead,
Yes.
and I was extremely sorry that I even approached him to repay me.
Yes. Yeah. Now, Arthur, do you remember your return journey to Singapore? Do you remember anything about the train trip
No,
down?
no,
No?
I can't recall anything
No.
about it.
And you don't even have a feeling for whether it was better than the trip up or anything like that?
No, I can't.
No,
I just can't remember it.
No. Do you remember getting back to Singapore? When you're back in Singapore?
Not really. I thought we went back to Sime Road
Ah.
camp
Good, thank you. Yeah.
when we got there.
So when you're in Sime Road camp, were you aware of Major Fagan being there? And
No,
no? And him nearly dying? No. Did you see people like Don Lee in Sime Road camp?
no.
No. Any other second, fourth fellows with you in Sime Road?
I can't recall
No.
anyone.
Did you have a mate, someone that you were dependent on, or you were dependent on each other in that camp?
No, I can't recall that either.
Yes. Maybe at this stage we'll just backtrack to the total period. Were there any? I know you've said that with Clooney you worked together to do things.
Yes, yes.
There are other times you had a fellow prisoner of war, regardless of nationality, that you were close to and
No,
dependent on?
I can't recall much about
No.
that part of
What would have been in that period, well, the time you're on the line and you've come back to Singapore, but mainly on the line, what was the worst thing that you experienced?
Well, the hard work and the cholera episode.
Yes. What about food? What was it enough, or well, I know what the answer will be to that. This is a silly question for me to ask, but what's your feeling about food and water and personal hygiene and caring for your eating utensils, that sort of thing? What sort of advice were you given in that area?
Well, I don't know whether we were given any advice, but we tried to keep clean. We were much better educated. What I'm trying to say is that I saw English fellows using their Dixie as a bedpan, and then eating out of it afterwards, which I never saw any Australians doing anything like that.
Mm. So you're back on Singapore and you're at Siam Road. What work did the Japanese force you to undertake there?
I think we went more or less straight onto the levelling party on the aerodrome.
Yes. Now, what was one of the main difficulties in working out there?
Oh well, it was much easier than any work we'd taken before.
Yes. Did they have any mechanical devices out on there, such as steamrollers or anything like that?
No,
Right.
no. I never saw anything mechanical out
No.
there. We had little skips on rails,
Yes.
which you wheeled out, emptied into the sea.
Was that to extend the runway, or what was the reason for doing that?
Well, they were more or less building the aerodrome.
Yes. Yeah.
I know they went through a Chinese cemetery, and there was big laughs about the fellows coming up with somebody's hip bone or jawbone.
Yes. Yeah. Did you have any problem with glare from?
We had big problems with our eyes.
Yes.
I don't think I even had a hat.
Yes.
Towards the end.
So you were down back to your Japanese lap at this stage, were you?
Yeah.
Your boots, were they? How were your boots? Were they worn out or?
They must have been. I might probably had a pair of wooden clogs, which I used to make.
Yes.
Or no, I made later on after that.
Mm-hmm.
I neglected to say earlier in the piece, when I had the cholera,
Mm-hmm.
Jock Leith and Albie Miller were with me in that camp, and we stuck together, and they fairly helped me when I was down with the cholera.
Yes.
In fact, I'd say Jock was the main reason that I'm still sitting here.
Yes. And they're both second, fourth men?
Both second floor.
Mm, yeah. And they both got back?
They both came back.
Both survived, yeah.
But they have both since died.
Yes, yeah. Now, you're back on Singapore for something like at least 18 months before the war ended. Do you actually remember the day, the first time that you heard that the war was over?
We heard all sorts of rumours, but we heard this particular rumour and we thought, well, this is it, this is true, and it was true, but we couldn't let on that we knew. The guards were all armoured, we couldn't let on that we knew. So we just had to sort of carry on and make out that we didn't know.
So how long was it after that you actually returned to Australia, and how did you return to Australia?
I would say it was about, must have been going on for 6 weeks before some planes used to come over and drop some medical supplies, but it wasn't until Lord Louis Mountbatten sailed into Singapore that, Lady Mountbatten was the first white woman I'd seen for those years.
So what was your route to come back to Australia? What was the route?
Well, to start with, the last few months as a POW, I got a soft job out on the camp garden. We were growing greens to supplement the diet.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the jungle handles, if I had any spare time, I used to mend the jungle handles or make new ones,
Mm-hmm.
made out of rubber trees, which they cut down. And during that period, one of the jobs was digging toilet holes. They had a big auger about 18 inches in diameter, and a crossbar on the top, and a team of fellows, about 6 or 8 blokes, going round and round and round. They used to go down to about 18 feet, I believe. And with constant use, or they used to put a thunderbox on top of it, with constant use, that hole gradually got bigger. And there's quite a few fellas fell down and met a horrible death.
Did you have contact with did you have a chap supervisor when you were working in the garden at the...
No. My friend Cliff Howe, he was in charge. I got on extremely well with him, and I don't know what he did all day, but anyway, he got me this soft job. I was able to take quite a lot of greens back in to camp, and I was back with Albie and Jock by that time. And anything any of us could get, we shared.
Did you have any contact with your 2nd, 4th officers now that you're back in Singapore? Or do you have people like Captain Bunning? Did you see him at any time?
No, I saw him.
Yeah.
I saw him, but no, I had no contact with him.
How about your NCOs?
Well, yes. Yeah, I had contact with quite a lot of the NCOs. Well, while we were at this stage, we had a fellow joined us, a fellow named Vincent joined us. He was from an Eastern States unit, and he was very friendly with several of our blokes, and he ended up transferring across to the 2nd, 4th. I see his name is in Colour Patch.
Yes, he is.
He was elite. Why he joined us? Apparently, reading his history, he's transferred out of some other unit prior to that.
Yes, yeah. So we now get to the point where you're returning to Australia, and I think we were going to look at what the route was, what vessels you came home on, or trains, or what have you.
Yes.
Do you recall the...
Yeah. We knew the war was over. We were free to move around. We used to walk back into Singapore down to the docks, and wondering when we would be given a seat on something or other. In the meantime, my cousin was a squadron leader flying Sunderland planes. He called inquiring about me, and unfortunately for me I was out working, so I missed a trip home with him. Then another Wild Catcham fellow also called, also a pilot. He called, and once again I was out working, so I missed both those efforts. So we used to wander down to the wharf. I used to I saw the Orangi hospital ship taking off with all these fellas and thought, gee, when am I going? Eventually we boarded the Arawa. There was a hell of a lot of second and fourth fellas on board. The food was not very good at all. In fact, it was just about as bad as prison camp. We landed at Darwin. We must have been there for several days, I think. We went out to one of the army camps there, and I saw all the girls. They were not in existence when we pulled out. I couldn't believe it. From Darwin we went to Brisbane for just a few hours, called in. And from Brisbane we went down to Sydney, and from Sydney we went to, I think it was Ingleburn. From there we went by train to Melbourne. From Melbourne we joined the Strathmore and sailed back to Fremantle.
What were conditions like on the Strathmore by comparison with the Arawa?
A lap of luxury. It was very good. Yeah. Although there was about 6 of us in a big cabin, a big room. We'd have a bit of trouble with one of the stewards. I suppose he was a steward, but he was very light-fingered. We managed to sort him out, and we had no more problem.
And when you came back to Perth, where were you stationed until you were discharged, I think in December?
We went to
45?
Point Water.
Yes. And how did you must have had an accumulation of pay, because as a prisoner of war you're unable to draw it.
That's right.
How did the authorities calculate what you were due, and did you get the right amount?
I never checked up. I never checked up.
Yes.
But I had over £700 accumulated, which to me was a lot of money.
It would have bought a house.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were discharged, I think, on December 45?
13th of September, I think.
Yes.
It's in December.
December, that's right, yeah. And what did you do then?
I went back to the farm, actually.
Yes. And this is at Wild Catcherman?
At Wild Catcherman, yes.
And now, when did you meet Eileen?
I was engaged to a girl before I went away.
Yes.
And that didn't work out. She was still single, but she had a boyfriend, so it didn't work out. I didn't take it very well, I must admit. I mean, she was something for me to hang on to for all those years of desperation, and it hurt me greatly. I became a woman hater for the best part of 2 years. Tried to drown myself in drink. But anyway, my neighbouring farm, their niece came up to stay with them. Turned out to be Eileen. So one thing led to another, and we ended up marrying.
Yes. And what was she working? What age was she at the time?
She was a tender age of 19 when she got married.
Was she? And was she working?
Yes, she was working in the butter factory at Bunbury.
Yes.
She was in the office, Sunny West. I think.
I was just going to say, was it Sunny West
Sunny
Cooperative
West.
Dairies?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got, what date did you get married?
25th of the 10th, 1946. 1947.
And where did you go and reside then?
We lived in a little old house on the farm.
What was farming like in 1947 onwards?
Oh, well, you can make a good living out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And did you, what conveniences did you have in your little old house on the farm?
Well, we had no refrigerator.
No.
We had a Coolgardie safe.
Yes.
We had a thunderbox for a toilet. It wasn't long before I got a septic tank installed. And
Yes. And did you have your car or ute or
the
what?
family had a car.
Family had a car?
Family. And the day before we were married, my father bought me a ute.
Yes.
I think things were still pretty tight on the farm, very tight. In fact, my money, my $700 went to the farm to help out. My father was a very, very fair man. In fact, he's the wisest man I ever knew. And, I should say that during those 3.5 years as a POW, I never had a word from home. They didn't know whether they knew I was a POW because I've got a paper saying that it was, after I'd posted missing, that I was a POW. So they knew I was a POW, but we had no contact whatsoever for all that time. A lot of blokes got Red Cross, word through Red Cross, or some contact or other, but unfortunately for me, I had nothing. And they didn't know that I was still alive or not until I think they got word to say I was on the boat coming home.
Now that was, a lot of those arrangements came through a combination of an organisation called RAPWE and the Red Cross, but you had a different name for RAPWE.
Yeah.
What was that?
Retain all prisoners of war indefinitely.
And that's how you felt about things at one stage, was
We
it?
waited for about 6 weeks before any signs of shifting us back home.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And farming on in Walcatcham, how many years did you farm for, and did you have a family?
We really started something. We had 5 children, and now we've got 17 grandchildren and about 15 great-grandchildren.
Yes.
So we really started something.
Yeah, yeah. And what was the main produce from your farm?
Wheat and sheep.
Yeah.
My father was a pioneer of the district, and the farm is still in the Gamble name. My son is on the farm.
Yes, yeah. And when did you actually leave the farm?
About 1980, I came to live had a house built in Mandurah. I went prospecting, and I guess I was lucky. I had 2 mates. We found a patch that had never been found before, and there was gold laying on the ground, so we did pretty well out of it. We ended up selling. I got that attached to the farm. I didn't want to sell. I was outnumbered. So I guess I guess I was very upset about selling. I went in the bush and had a bloody good cry.
Yes. And when did you move to this estate, this retirement estate?
2001, I think. 2001, October 2001.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Arthur, I think that just about wraps your life story, but the main focus, of course, was on the area of your military involvement.
Yes.
And I'd like to say how much I appreciate the opportunity of interviewing you, and it becomes a little part of history for your family and maybe other people who have an interest in that area as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for giving me the opportunity.